All right. Well, hey, welcome back to Rough Cut Faith, everyone.
Howdy.
Thank you for. Hey, you looked at the camera this time.
I did.
Good job.
I was like, wait. I'm looking at you. I'm like, wait a minute.
Way to go! Yeah, the people
Hello,
want to see
interwebs.
our faces. Yeah. So, welcome back. We're glad to be here. It is the Monday after Father's Day.
Yeah.
Which is, admittedly, always an odd time. I feel like
Monday or the day after Father's Day? Okay,
Father's Day weekend is an odd.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's an odd thing.
Sure.
We had a great time as a family.
Yeah.
For us, we enjoy time as a family. I've got an 18-year-old and a 15-year-old,
Yeah.
and they still like hanging out with us. So
Yeah.
we watched a good movie and ate burgers and played Mario Kart.
Nice.
And spent some time in the woods. It was good. It was good.
Sounds magical.
It was magical. Yeah.
We did Father's Day on Saturdays because we're usually working on Sundays.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a pretty. I slept in, which the dog let me sleep in. Normally the
Wow.
dog wakes me up because I'm like the person that'll take him outside.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to sleep in, and then the family made me breakfast, which was kind of cool because that's
cool.
usually my routine.
Yeah.
And then I had picked up a book at the library and spent the afternoon reading the book. We went out and had some burgers for dinner, and which is interesting that both of us picked burgers to eat.
It's just like the thing that you have. I don't know why. I feel like
I eat so few burgers anymore.
Yeah.
And when Aim was like, "What do you want?" I'm like, "Nothing complex. Maybe just a nice burger."
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so yeah.
I so rarely want a steak. I know that might be weird. I would rather have a burger.
Really?
Most of the time. Yeah.
Well,
I don't
will try not to
mind.
judge
I don't
you.
mind steak. I just
Yeah.
like. If you want, if it's between a burger and a steak, I'm like, oh, you can put cheese on a burger.
You can put cheese on a steak.
Yeah, but
It's
that's
just blue
weird.
cheese on a steak
Yeah,
is
it's
really
just
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheddar melting down over a burger patty is so much more delightful to me than a steak.
Yeah,
I don't know why. It's just
I'm
weird
a
thing.
big fan of the reverse sear and like just let it dry age with some salt on
Yeah.
there, and then yeah. Now I don't like a big steak like I used to.
Yeah,
That's a big part.
I tend to not like the mistakes.
Of course. Then why do you like me?
I feel like there had to be a dad joke in there when we're talking about Father's Day. But Father's Day I feel like it's weird because it's like the kids and my wife want to do so many nice things for me, and I'm just like, you guys are great, cool, thank
that's
you,
fine.
thank you. But it's not necessary, It's just I told them I appreciate what they write in the cards more than a gift.
Yeah.
So if you just want to write some nice stuff in a card, that
Note to self:
yeah.
Mike likes writing.
I do. So you can stop getting me so many gifts, Scott.
all
Just
the
write
time.
nice things to me.
You like my gifts. It's my presents.
I do.
Oh,
Your presents.
it's
There's
Father's
your
Day.
cheesy
Yeah,
dad joke for the morning.
Yeah. We were talking about today and maybe the next rough cut, like talking about some literature, some books
Yeah,
that we've.
yeah.
And I was like, one of the books that I was given for Father's Day is 101 Great Dad Jokes. And it sits beside
Fantastic.
my bed, just waiting for me to decide I need to cross that line and start learning more dad jokes.
I think you do. I think you can run out. So having 100 more at your disposal is really.
Yeah, I don't think that they're
important.
necessarily all appropriate dad jokes at this stage.
Those are the best dad
Those
jokes.
are the best dad jokes.
When you can shock your kids just a little bit.
Just a little bit?
Those are the best. Yeah.
Yeah, those moments are always fun.
Well, speaking of good reading.
Yeah.
We thought that today it might be good to talk about some of the books, or a book that we've read semi-recently that we each enjoy reading. We don't often have a lot of time to read. But the thing that we like about reading is concepts in these books. It's like sitting with a friend. It's like sitting with someone and learning from them, learning from their experiences. And so we try to mix it up with some fiction and nonfiction because both genres are important.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of books that we've read recently and interacted with recently that have been meaningful to us.
Yeah.
So let's start with you,
Oh,
Scott.
man, I was going to say, well, let's start with you, Mike. So
That's I started talking first, so I got to pick you. And you actually brought your book with you.
I did.
I didn't bring
because
mine.
we talked about this yesterday, and I thought, well, what am I gonna? Which
should
book?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. I laughed with you this morning. I was like, well, most of the books I've really consumed have been about like ADHD lately. So
yeah.
So and it's like, oh,
not
I don't
necessarily
even
a general audience.
No, that's a very specific audience.
Probably more than we think, though.
Yeah. So I picked up. I was trying to go through like what books have I read like that I think would be that have been helpful. And so this one's kind of rooted in our. We began the process of looking at how do we expand like our leadership teams here at the church. How do we bring accountability into the pastoral team and as a representative, like. Here at the church. And so we've been working through that process, developing a framework for that. And I ended up picking up a book called When Narcissism Comes to Church.
Okay.
I did the audio book of it and thought it was so good that I actually wanted to get a paper copy. And that's kind of like I'll do a lot of audiobooks.
Okay.
I don't necessarily take a lot of the audiobooks and go, I want to have a paper copy of that.
Yeah.
And so when you were like, what books have influenced you? That was my decision.
This is a
book that I was like, yeah, I bought this one. And the other one that I bought is Unwanted, and I didn't have I didn't have my paper copy with that. Somebody's borrowing it. That's a really fascinating book, but a completely different topic. But this one is the subtitle is Healing Your Community from Emotional and Spiritual Abuse, and I thought. The best way to kind of summarize this is actually a quote that they begin with pretty early in the book. And they quote Nouwen with this, but this is...
Henry Nouwen?
Henry Nouwen, yeah. And so it says he wasn't trying to define narcissism, but he might as well have been when he wrote this. And this is his quote, "The long, painful history of the church is the history of people ever and again tempted to choose power over love, control over the cross, being a leader over being led. Those who resist this temptation to the end and thereby give us hope are the true saints. One thing is clear to me, the temptation of power is greatest when intimacy is a threat. Much Christian leadership is exercised by people who do not know how to develop healthy, intimate relationships and have opted for power and control instead. Many Christian empire builders have been people unable to give and receive love." And then they say, "This sad abandonment of the humble way of Jesus shows up today in pastors of large and small churches, in beloved Christian celebrities, prolific clergy authors and bloggers, dynamic church planters, and seemingly godly men and women. The frightening reality of narcissism is that it often presents in a compelling package. Narcissism is the glittering image we present to the world." This book was, I think it was uncomfortable to read, because what it looks at in many ways is it's unpacking the wounds of people that have suffered at the hands of spiritual abuse.
Okay.
And the way that they go about it, it really, I think it does a really good job of showing us what's at stake as people that are involved in the lives of others.
Okay.
And it does address, because what they point out throughout this book is that narcissism, or the study of narcissism within clergy, is not really a topic that is addressed in research. There's not a lot of stuff that was going on in and around that. And so they lean into it and start looking at what are the characteristics to identify what narcissistic behavior looks like.
That's what I was going to ask you, is from what you remember in reading the book, what are some of the characteristics of narcissism that show up maybe in general, but also specifically
Sure.
within a church context?
Well, so one of the things that was the most uncomfortable in this is they're starting to identify it. They say most of the characteristics of narcissism tend to show up and be celebrated in church planters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they tend to be very driven, very entrepreneurial. They're not going to take no for an answer, and they're just moving forward.
So when you saw that in the book,
Yeah.
being a church planter,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm included in that too.
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
church
Yeah.
planter.
Why is this a me thing?
Yeah,
now?
no, it's so I'm interviewing you about your narcissism. That's what we're doing.
Well, I'd love to talk about it. It's too early for this.
Oh man.
Yeah.
You saw those characteristics of
Sure.
church planters. How did you respond to that? Did you feel like,
it was really uncomfortable because so in the church planting process in the world, like when we were starting the Grove, like we went and hung out with a lot of church planters, and you saw a lot of really great, godly, humble people. But then you also saw some that you were just like, whoa, that's something's okay. Like that's a different personality than mine. And it doesn't mean that they were narcissists, but it was just like there's definitely personality types that go into church planting.
Yeah, there were traits.
Yeah.
I remember because for a time, especially at the very beginning, we were kind of hanging out with a fairly well-known group. That seemed to all attract the same type of person.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was like the very driven.
Type A.
Yeah, that type A,
hard worker, rough and tumble guy kind of thing. Yeah.
Almost like in today's speech, it might have been like the alpha male kind of figure. Perhaps not as toxic. But it was this idea that you just go, you bring a group around you, and you go, and it's
strap
usually
the plow and just go.
Yeah, and it's like there's a sense of charisma.
Yeah.
There's a leader in that kind of is able to bring people around them.
Sure.
And move towards a direction and have a vision, and that's to be celebrated.
Yeah.
But then that tends to then foster a culture that elevates the leader.
I think that was one aspect of it for me. The other part of it that was weird was I went through assessment when we had connected in with the church planning network eventually, and a lot of the process of that I think was really helpful. And then there were other things that where it was just like you have to be careful that you. One of my weaknesses, Mike, was that I was too willing to let someone else get credit for something.
Yeah.
Which was
Too
a very
willing
yeah.
to be
I was too
humble.
willing to let somebody else get credit for it. They're like, you just need to be more courageous, and you need to, you need to step into your role, and you need to be able to do this and this and this. And I had gone through another assessment with another cohort that was working with pastors throughout the Northeast, and that was just disturbing for me because I didn't measure up to all of the entrepreneurial characteristics of a successful pastor or church planting pastor. Because I wasn't the way that I went about it. I look at it now and just recognize that this is my personality. Some of that is the way my brain works. Some of it is this, that, and the other. But there was a type that people said, if you're going to be a successful pastor, you must be this, 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 and this.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're going, oh, you're a narcissist because you good narcissist pastors fit this, 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 this. But in looking at it, when I came back to this book, I was like, whoa. What is it that, as a culture of church, because that was 3 different organizations, international, and regional in the States through a church, that these were things that I would sit back and just go there was a common platform and capacity to care for people's souls was not the mark of success as much as it was teach well, but really you have to lead the organization.
So it seems like that criteria could be applied to any business venture across the board.
In fact, one of those assessments was based on the results of a study done on Fortune 500 companies and their executives. So I very clearly recognized after that assessment, I will never be an executive Fortune 500 guy. And I was like, and at the time I was just devastated.
Of course.
Because I was with someone that scored very high in that dynamic that I respect as a friend and as a pastor, and I was just like, I'm not wired the way that you are. And I remember just feeling like, as a guy that dealt with insecurity already, like to sit down in a group of folks, and then all of a sudden I'm like off the charts, like in several of these areas, and I'm just like, and that was a heavy season too in our life, and I just was like, why am I even here?
But at that point, you were how many years into church planting?
Probably 8. 7 or 8.
So you're like, I've been doing this for 7 or 8 years, and then you go, I'm not qualified according to this criteria.
Sure.
But so kind of getting back a little bit to the book, but this leads into it. That mentality is not scripturally based.
Yes.
And so when we started to look outside of Scripture to develop the criteria of what church leadership looks like, we opened the door, and I say we as the Western church or the evangelical church, we opened the door for this type of thinking to take over.
Sure.
To the point where now we're giving business quizzes, like assessments, rather than looking at what your spiritual gifting is. And just to put a caveat on that, I am not a fan of spiritual gift inventories. So that's not what I'm talking about.
I think it's when you know someone well enough to recognize this is the character of who they are, and this is the pattern of how they care for people. And that means, like, the model that you and I have always really been geared toward was not as much the industrialization of the pastoral role, but the within the church community, recognizing and identifying those with the with the character that may not necessarily have the skill set, but that can be developed, right? And help them move into that role. What the book really kind of gets into is it says the church is as much responsible for feeding into or nurturing the culture of narcissistic pastors. Because the traits of someone who is entrepreneurial, organizationally minded, those are good things, but they're good things that could very easily get skewed out of balance when all of a sudden what matters is maintaining the organizational structure, maintaining the role of authority and power and influence, and then using the organizational structure as either a bludgeoning tool or as walls to just keep people away so that there's no accountability, anything that's there. And so that, I think, that's not a big church or a small church thing. It really isn't. In fact, most of the people I would say that I have personally interacted with, where I would say I would be concerned or I wouldn't feel comfortable worshiping within that community, it usually is a smaller church with a heavy-handed pastor that is kind of has the mindset of, or at least the public persona, if what they say in public is like, thus saith the Lord, kind of a thing, like, but it's really very clearly opinion, perspective, and they're not willing to receive any kind of feedback. Those are usually like smaller. Those have been smaller churches.
Those are small churches.
And we hear about the big churches. When that happens. We hear about and we can see and like flag the big churches because they've got the mechanism to promote.
Well, there's a celebrity, usually at a big church has credence.
Yeah.
You have a church of 5,000 or 10,000. Whoever's the pastor there is kind of seen as this leader that gets like, those are the guys that get book deals. Those are the guys that are on the news that get called to comment on things going on within the culture. So we've adopted this celebrity culture kind of context for those big churches. And then, of course, if something goes wrong at those big churches, those are the ones we hear about. Yeah. But a vast majority of the American church is made up of 80 and under. Yeah. You know, so those are the churches that, when you read a book like this, you kind of go, oh, well, I got to watch out for being. I'm
watch out for the celebrity pastor.
Yeah, watch out for those guys.
Watch out for that guy on Instagram. Or watch out for that guy on Facebook.
But and I think you could attest to this too. In the last 14, 15 years that we've been involved in ministry of some sort, a vast majority of the counseling that I've done has been people experiencing hurt and spiritual abuse from small churches, from even small groups. Yes. You could have a church of 10, a church of 50, a church of 100, church of 10,000. It doesn't really matter the size. It's that anytime there is an authority figure who's using the threat of eternity to manipulate and maintain control, that's abusive. Yeah. And I can't think of anything more evil than somebody saying, I am in authority. Yeah. I am over you, and I hold the keys to eternity. Yeah. And so you have to do what I say.
Or even I hold your connection to this community of people that you care about. If you want to be a part of this group, then you better do what I say. Right. And it's like, you know, we can. There's so many aspects of that are troubling to me. Yeah. And I think the thing that we had already started the process of bringing layers of accountability, additional layers of accountability into the church. You know, because when you start a church, you kind of have.
You're not sure where it's going to go.
Yeah, you put some protective barriers up. Yeah. And then you get to a spot where you recognize, okay, great, the church is healthy enough now that we can sit back. It's established enough that it isn't contingent on just the pastors that are running it. Right? And so it's time for the church to take another step to maturity, time to enter into that. So how do we bring in those layers of accountability? And so we were in that process of going through all of this. And then I pick up this book, and I'm just like, it really does matter the culture that the church brings as to whether they tolerate it. Because you've got a narcissistic pastor. They're not narcissistic unless the leadership of the church is enabling that. Yeah. Yeah. Right? That guy, if he's got nobody that calls him out and says it's not acceptable, you're out of alignment with the ways of Jesus, you're out of alignment with this, and this, we're holding you accountable to that. We're sorry. Yeah. You served a role, but your character is out of alignment with the gospel truth. Yeah. Right? And so to look at that and recognize that the character of a church in its leadership, in the people that help keep a guard on the pulse of the church, really matters. Yeah. And this book really just drove home to me, one, that it's so easy to see a shift take place in churches. To go from a healthy place to like little compromise here, little compromise there.
So did the book detail any of that, like what that shift looks like or how that happens?
You're asking a question. I read this a couple months ago. So I think they lean into more so how do we heal from it. Okay. Not so much what are the things that like not about the paths toward it. They're like, listen, here's the big red flags, here's the dangers of it, and then it's more of how do we heal from this, right? Yeah. And really, it's It's transparency and humility. It's the things that we sit back and we go, what's the character we should have, right?
Yeah.
What does it look like to be a Christian?
Yeah.
It's those things actually affecting the way that an organization runs. And I think there's been some movements that I've seen, even in the last couple of months, within Christianity or at least the parts or the aspects or the arms of the church or the Christian community that are saying, hey, we need to call churches to accountability and transparency because this is like really harmful.
Yeah. Well, it's not only harmful to the people, it's harmful to Christ.
Yeah.
Because people outside of the church are observing, and they're observing what feels like there's already enough people in the culture that says if you're part of a church, you're part of a cult.
Yeah.
You can't think for yourself. You're not allowed to question the leadership. You're not allowed to engage outside of that community. You know, all of those characteristics are like, this feels cult-like. But that's people outside the church looking at a faith community and making a judgment call. But then if they hear in the news, this just happened, this pastor has been called on account, this pastor has held an iron grip over these people for this long, then it's like, oh, well, yeah, I've always said that.
How many documentaries have I seen on Netflix and stuff about cults in the last year or two? It's like, oh, yeah. And so...
And more on churches,
True
too.
confession here.
Yeah.
That's like my guilty pleasure. Like one of the guilty pleasures of the last probably the last 6 months is I went on this kick where I was just watching every documentary on a cult that I could see. And what scared me most was the similarity of language to churches. Right? And so you get cults. Well, where does narcissism fit into that? Oh, there's a lot of narcissism that fits into there. And so it's the language in the community that you look at and you go, I see why people got sucked into that. And then you look at it and you go, oh, that was a totally narcissistic leader that abused and harmed people and took advantage of people for their own gain, for their own profit. And it's like, it's so easy.
It's the terrifying thing to me about narcissistic leadership is the fact that they're generally adept enough to be very aware of what people need. But instead of taking that need and saying, let me show you how Christ fulfills that need and brings freedom, they take that need and say, let me show you how I can fulfill that need and keep you safe. And so they pull you in, and it's completely exploitative. It's manipulative, but it's based on them being aware enough of people's needs. And I think that's why pastors are almost on that line of could go that direction because to be a pastor is a spiritual gift. We see that listed in the New Testament that pastoring is not a role or an office of the church so much as it is a spiritual gift. But I believe that it means to shepherd, and I believe that what that means then would be to be aware enough. Like the gifting is to be aware enough of the needs of people, to be empathetic, to recognize who they are and how to gently guide and direct and help them, but it's helping them towards freedom in Christ. So to have that spiritual gift of pastoring means that you're already attuned to the needs of people. So twist that, make it something that's self-serving. It's so simple. It's so easy to go, oh, now I see the needs of people. It's all for me now. And I'll
I think
exploit it.
Those are the warnings that I think we see Jesus talking about. You know, he's like, I'm not a hired hand. I'm not here just for what I gain, right? And as you were describing that, the image I had was the way that Jesus says that, listen, my sheep know my voice and I hear them.
Yeah.
Like, and I call them by name. There's an intimacy that God has with us. And as like under shepherds is like one of the ways that it's referred to as like a pastors. We're under shepherds. We're under shepherds of the great shepherd, Jesus, right? And so if all of a sudden we're sitting there and we're manipulating or exploiting Jesus's people for our own gain, for our own sense of satisfaction or self-identity or whatever it is, like, that's terrifying. And I think you nailed it, because what makes that possible is when you know people. And when you know the wounds that they have carried because they've been vulnerable or honest, and then you twist it. And I think both of us have seen pastors that started out well. Saw vulnerabilities and exploited it for their own gain in a variety of ways. And I think that's why it matters that we continually keep, in many ways, that we continually keep going. How do we keep bringing transparency into the church? How do we bring accountability into the church at a leadership level? How do we how do we raise the standard to say, and not all leadership is narcissistic leadership. Courageous leadership means at times you do have to say things.
All of those traits are positive traits.
But what's the motivation behind it? Is it for the good of someone else, or is it for protecting you
for getting
as
your
an
way?
Individual getting your way, right? And this is where I think it gets beyond just a pastor piece, because if the leadership of a church, let's say there's a narcissistic leader in that church, they go sideways, and how does the church respond? Like, how does the leadership of the church respond? Do they circle the wagons and protect that person, that leader, at all costs? Or do they enter into transparency, accountability? What's the response of leadership, at the upper dynamics of the church? Because if the churches are just circling the wagons to protect the organization and to protect this, we can't lose influence, we can't lose power, we can't lose this, then I think that's a dangerous path to be.
I think that is when evil, I wouldn't even say when narcissism.
When evil comes to church.
When evil infiltrates is when the highest priority is protecting the person or protecting the organization. And so ignoring or covering over any type of discrepancy, be it financial, be it a moral failure, emotionally abusive failure. Anytime we're covering over something that isn't Christ-like, particularly at a leadership level, then we're just complicit in evil.
It's I think, as we kind of bring this section to a close, because I want to hear about your book. We've talked about this one a lot. I think it really I would totally recommend this book. I would recommend this book and a posture of humility in reading it, because it's, especially if you have experienced the darker side of narcissism in a church, or the darker side of just even organizational unhealth, right? It at a faith community level. In reading it, this kind of pulled some scabs off of some wounds for me, and what I have experienced, either growing up or just as a young adult, and just looking wow, that was really being able to identify it and say, that was really unhealthy. It may not have been narcissism, but it was nurturing culture that made it easier to exploit people. And so recognizing that, while also separating out the good that certain people have brought into your life in those times or those seasons, that takes another step
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That it's not always bad. But I would totally recommend this book as something that people in the church can look at, because if we're going to change the culture of the greater church, for you and I at least, it starts here, and the people that we engage with. It starts within individual congregations that aren't the mega churches, that aren't the massively influential churches, but they're the churches that can sit down and say, we're going to change the culture here.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're going to honor God by being this type of a church. And I think this is a great book to open up the conversation. It's a great book to help you, help people that read it, go through church with eyes open. And hopefully the humility that we, hope to demonstrate at a leadership level is also becomes the reality in the lives of people where they're at, and that they can say in humility, hey, this is not what Jesus has called us to.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great.
Would you say it's a book that moves towards healing as well?
Yeah, I would. I would, because now the healing process at times means you got to churn up a lot of garbage. Yeah. And that's the scarier part.
So it may be triggering, if you're really suffering from spiritual abuse and that's very present in your life, would this book come with a warning?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If you've experienced significant church hurt, I think this would be a book that I would say enter into it carefully.
It would probably be beneficial to read it in community, rather than on your own. Processing it by yourself. Have a friend or a group that goes through it together, so that if it churns things up, then it's something that you could process together.
Okay. Because spiritual abuse isn't going away. And it's been around for a long time, and it's not going away. And so the reality is where can we engage in that? How can we engage in that? And I think humility, transparency, vulnerability, pursuing the character of Christ in our lives, and as our church, that matters. And it's hard for those that may be ministry leaders or pastors that might catch this. It's difficult to expose yourself to the vulnerability of saying, listen, this is the organization. Books are open. This is the organization. How our schedule operates is open. To enter into that sometimes.
There's an accessibility there.
Because it means that, I don't know about you, but I do think about what are people's perceptions of me. What is my role as how does my engagement in this setting affect the way people perceive who I am? Because I recognize I'm a representative of God, of Jesus to a lot of folks. And that's not something that I want to take lightly. But it is something that, we say we live with the presence and the reality of Christ. God is with us, the Spirit indwells us. But as a leader and at a leadership level within a local context of a church, how we conduct ourselves matters. And it can be really scary to enter into this kind of humility, the kind of humility that Jesus had. As a husband, as a father, as somebody that wants to provide any sense of stability there. Because you're just recognizing hey, don't mess up. Because if you're saying we want to live with transparency and accountability, then
that's a vulnerable place.
And I think that's okay. And I think it's a good place to exist there. But you've got to reconcile that in your own head and in your own mind as a pastor, because you'll never you can call the church to it all you want, but unless you live that way, forget it. It ain't happening.
The culture starts at the leadership level and has to be modeled.
So
So what's the book called again?
the book is when narcissism comes to church.
Yeah.
My friend's narcissism. Yeah.
But don't take my word for it.
But don't take reading rainbow. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good place to wrap up for
I think so.
today. I think this was a great conversation. Thanks for
Yeah.
reading the book and
Yeah.
bringing it to us. Next week, we're going to jump into another book. So if you enjoyed this conversation, tune in next week because it's going to be very similar. So hopefully it won't be quite as much about narcissism and pain and church hurt.
We're talking about what, Mike? Politics?
Politics and spirituality.
Oh.
So, like spirituality with a capital S and politics with a lowercase p.
I love it.
Yeah. So again, thank you so
Yeah.
much for tuning in. We appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions of any sort, leave them in the comments, send us a message on YouTube, or find us at discoverthegrove.com. And you can contact us through that website as well. We'd love to answer questions. If we can.
Hit topics.
We'll
topic
talk
suggestions.
topics or questions that you'd like to hear us talk about. Let us know, and we'll do that. But that's all for today. Thanks very much. Have a great week.